What's up everybody, Naika here, and welcome to my Halloween special for 2022. Now, some of you probably know that I really like horror movies, but I can totally understand why these wouldn't be everyone's cup of tea because, let's be honest, these movies are pretty freaking scary. So tonight, I'm actually gonna recommend 10 horror movies that are not only great for horror hardcore fans, but they're great for casuals and people who might not be into horror movies in the first place. And they are all movies that are featured in 10 particular subgenres of horror. So sit back, relax, and let's eat some Halloween candy as I discuss 10 great horror films that aren't scary. Let's go. So the first subgenre of horror I'm going to be talking about is family horror. And that's pretty much horror films that are great for the whole family. And let's be honest, we have a lot to choose from here. Whether it's the Gremlins franchise, whether it's Beetlejuice, or whether it's a stop motion film like Paranorman or The Nightmare Before Christmas. And if I'm not mistaken, I think the Muppets even have a Halloween special too. You've got a lot of choices here, but I'm gonna go with a pick that my coworkers chose and pushed me to watch a couple years ago, and that's Hocus Pocus from 1993. It's a movie that follows 3 resurrected witches who are pursuing a group of kids in modern day Salem, Massachusetts on Halloween night. Now, I think this is a really good movie filled with great pacing, a great cast that's really fun, and it's a cast that you're gonna care about throughout the entire film. And it's got 3 great villains, one of which being Bette Midler, of course. The great thing about the film too is that it's not overtly scary. It's a film that features a lot of hijinks and a lot of comedy. So again, this is going to be a film that's going to be great for the whole family. And most of all, this is a great primer for anyone looking to get into the Halloween spirit. So if you're looking for a family-friendly adventure that is just pretty much themed enough for Halloween, definitely check out Hocus Pocus. And now that the sequel to Hocus Pocus is now on Disney Plus, you've got more reasons to go and revisit this classic. Do not miss out on Hocus Pocus. Now that we got that squared away, let's talk about our next subgenre of horror, and that's teen horror. Now, I'm sure the first thing everyone thinks about when they think about teen horror is a group of adults portraying teenagers, and they're just getting killed throughout the whole movie. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about. Teen horror as a subgenre is a subgenre of horror that uses coming-of-age elements and traditional teenage issues to invoke fear in its audience. And there are a lot of fantastic movies as examples. My initial example was going to be Carrie from the 70s. Now, Carrie, I think, is a fantastic film that has a lot of timeless themes about fear and adolescence. But I'm gonna be very honest, it's a very scary movie. That also goes with a newer classic that I think everyone should watch, and that's It Follows. I think It Follows is a fantastic movie, but yes, it is also very scary. There are a bunch of other good horror films that feature teens on Netflix, such as There's Someone Inside Your House, and I'm a big fan of the Fear Street trilogy. But if there is one pick that I could recommend that is very good and not so scary, then it's The Craft from 1996. It's a movie that follows 4 teenage outcasts seeking to escape the horrors of their everyday life by pursuing witchcraft. I think The Craft is a relatable film for anyone that's been through high school here in the States, and that's especially the case if you're somebody that went through a parochial school. Every part of the film is just relatable. The cast is fantastic, each of the leads is great, and that is especially true of Rachel True. I think she's kind of an unsung hero in the film. Even though this film was set in the 90s horror films were really quiet on subjects and ideas of race, and Rachel True's inclusion really had this great discussion going on in the film. I also think the film is kind of like a lighter version of Carrie. Carrie is a very scary film, and The Craft touches on some of Carrie's themes, but there's so much of the film that isn't that scary. I think it's a great Halloween watch, and if you're looking for something that isn't too terrifying but still touches on what makes being a teenager scary, definitely watch The Craft. Next up, we're going to be talking about a horror subgenre that really deserves more praise, and that is black horror. As Gabrielle Belot of the New York Times reports, black horror is a subgenre of horror made by African American filmmakers that captures the existential fears of being black in America. I'm also guilty of not watching enough black horror, and I'm hoping to change that. Now, there are a lot of great black horror films out there that have been recommended to me, including Ganja and Hess, JD's Revenge, Blackula and Blackenstein, though my initial pick for tonight's video was going to be Nia DaCosta's Candyman. I think it's a fantastic film, and it's a really, really amazing update to the original Candyman film, but Nia DaCosta's Candyman is terrifying, and there is a lot of gore, there's a lot of blood, and the subject matter is so relevant, but if you are a bit of a normie when it comes to gore, it might not be your cup of tea. So I'm gonna defer to the new horror master of black horror, and that's Jordan Peele. And I love Us. I am a huge fan of Nope, and I don't understand the divisiveness behind Nope, but if there's any film I'm going to choose from his body of work, I'm gonna choose Get Out. Get Out is a film about a photographer who encounters unspeakable horrors while visiting the parents of his white girlfriend. Now, in my opinion, Get Out leads the way in the black horror renaissance. It's a very, very disturbing film that isn't really there to horrify you or scare you in any way, but it really builds up with tension and dread, and it has such a timely and relevant message that I don't think anyone in America should miss out on. Furthermore, some of the performances in Get Out are outstanding, especially Daniel Kaluuya's. If you have any issues about Get Out, then you cannot fault Kaluuya's performance. It's a masterpiece, and he expounds on that work on Nope as well. And honestly, I'm a bit biased to Get Out because it was one of the best theater experiences I've ever had, especially when it came to the ending. So if there's any film that I think encapsulates black horror but doesn't bombard you with jump scares, I think Get Out is a good choice. Please do not miss out on Get Out, and definitely go check out Jordan Peele's other works as soon as you can. Next up, we're going to talk about another subgenre of horror that's really popular nowadays, and that's folk horror. And folk horror as a subgenre is horror that utilizes folklore to stoke fear in its audience, where typical elements include a rural setting, themes of isolation, religion, the power of nature, and the potential darkness of rural landscapes. Now, you have a lot of great films that exemplify folk horror, including a personal favorite of mine, Midsommar, which I think is fantastic, but can be terrifying in a lot of ways. The Blair Witch Project, for my money, is also a folk horror film, but we'll get into more of that later on in the video. Also, a personal favorite of mine is the South Korean film The Wailing, which I think has a lot of folk horror elements, but in my opinion, it's very terrifying, and if you scare easily, I don't think The Wailing would be the first film you should check out. Apostle, The Wicker Man, and Feast also feature into this category, but I am not a big fan of Feast, even though it is the first Welsh horror film I've ever seen. I think its cinematography is fantastic, but I'm not a big fan of its slow pace. But it isn't scary, so if that's something you're interested in, you can definitely check it out on Hulu. However, my pick for folk horror for tonight is going to be 2015's The Witch, which is about a Puritan family who is plagued by dark forces from the woods surrounding their farm. Now, to me, The Witch is the epitome of folk horror. The main cast is isolated from society, they're surrounded by forests and woodland areas, and there are some dark forces at play that are kind of toying with them throughout the film. The Witch is also a very slow-paced film, and a lot of the film works by building up tension and dread, and there are no overt jump scares here. The Witch also has a lot of subtext when it comes to patriarchy, and if you're somebody that wishes to see more films talk and discuss about the issues surrounding patriarchy, I think The Witch is a great film to watch. Anya Taylor-Joy, who is also in The Northman and The Queen's Gambit, really steals the film for me, and she delivers a stand-up performance as our lead protagonist. And lastly, I think The Witch is a very dark and atmospheric film, and I think it's a fantastic film if you're hanging out with a bunch of friends on Halloween night. So for folk horror, definitely check out The Witch. Moving right along to our next subgenre, we're going to be talking about vampire horror, because you can't talk about Halloween without talking about vampires. Now, we have a ton of examples of vampire films, but I'm going to be honest, a ton of them are pretty terrifying. You have Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, you have Interview with the Vampire, there are 80s classics like The Lost Boys and Fright Night, which I love to death. And there are a few Netflix films out there that I think are pretty good and not that scary, like Night Teeth and Day Shift. However, my pick for tonight is going to be the New Zealand masterpiece, What We Do in the Shadows from 2014. It's a movie that's pretty much a mockumentary that chronicles the lives of 4 vampires who share a flat in Wellington, New Zealand. The film is absolutely hilarious, and it's totally great for those of you who grew up on reality television and The Office. Lots of the humor in this film revolves around how unscary these vampires are to normal humans compared to how they think in real life. And there are so many things and so many situations that mirror real life fights with roommates, but it's just in a medieval vampire context, if you understand what I'm saying. So if you want a vampire horror film that's hilarious, not scary, and kind of true to life in a weird way, do not miss out on What We Do in the Shadows from 2014. It is amazing. Like, don't sleep on it. Now, you can't talk about Halloween without talking about ghosts. And if there are any ghost movies that people can think about that aren't scary, chances are somebody's gonna throw out the original Ghostbusters from 1984. I personally love Ghostbusters, but I think it's kind of a cliche to throw it out there. So I feel like it might be better to kind of think of something else that'll kind of satiate people's taste buds for ghost horror this Halloween. Now, you have John Carpenter's The Fog, but it's not necessarily my favorite ghost movie. Poltergeist is an 80s classic that I think everyone should watch, but if you scare easily, I don't think it'll be your cup of tea, because a lot of the horror takes place in a suburban home, and if that's kind of what you grew up with, then you might be ruffled up a little bit. House is an 80s classic, and I'm a big fan of Asian ghost films like A Chinese Ghost Story from Hong Kong and Ju-on the Grudge from Japan. But my pick for your Halloween ghost horror film tonight is going to be the Thai horror classic Shudder from 2004. It's a fantastic film about a photographer who's haunted by ghosts after his involvement in a hit-and-run collision. Shudder is a great film with great pacing, and you probably noticed that this is kind of a theme with me, right? I'm a big stickler about films that are paced very well. Shudder is no different. Shudder is also not so scary. It's not there to deliver a jump scare a minute, though there are few and far in between. A lot of them are well placed, and much of the film is kind of like unraveling a mystery. Furthermore, I think Shudder is a really interesting film if you're interested in Thai culture. It really does do more show than tell, but if you pay attention, you're gonna learn and take away a lot of things that your average Western movie is gonna talk about with regards to Thailand. It's not terrifying, as I mentioned before, and it really does lull you into a mystery, and it's kind of your job to see it through. However, I am going to mention that there are some triggers in this film, so trigger warnings for suicide and sexual assault. If those things are triggers for you, I would say avoid Shudder and maybe watch Ghostbusters. But I think Shudder is such a unique and underrated film that I think it's totally awesome for you guys to check it out this Halloween. Next up, we got zombie horror, and I don't think I can talk about Halloween without talking about zombies, right? And as a lot of you probably know, we've had this huge resurgence of zombies in pop culture for the last 20 years, which means that there are a lot of great examples to choose from, right? You've got the classic Night of the Living Dead, which I should have chosen, right? Because it's a great movie, it's not that scary, the pacing's good, the action's great, and there's a terrific black lead helming the film. But I decided to go for a film that's a little bit more modern. Now, there are other films you can choose in this category, like Return of the Living Dead, which I think is an 80s classic, Day of the Dead, City of the Living Dead, hell, even Peter Jackson's Dead or Alive, which is a personal favorite of mine. But if there's any horror film that I'm gonna choose for your zombie horror film tonight, then it's gonna be 2016's Train to Busan. Train to Busan is a fantastic film that centers around a father and daughter struggling to survive a zombie outbreak while being trapped on a high-speed train traveling from Seoul to Busan. I can talk all day about Train to Busan because number one, it's an action-packed thrill ride that plays more like an action film than it does a horror film. There aren't as many conventional scares as you might assume there'd be for a zombie film. A lot of it plays out like Speed in some ways. A lot of the thrills you're gonna find is basically seeing the father, the daughter, and the rest of the cast survive this outbreak in a very enclosed space. Furthermore, the film finds a fantastic way to balance action, drama, and character development without skipping a beat. Because Train to Busan has a lot of characters, especially when you bring up this guy, which I think is one of the best horror characters you'll ever see. I mean, you should totally watch this movie for this guy alone. He is great. For anyone that knows what I'm talking about, yes, please do not spoil it for our viewers. He is awesome. You should watch this movie for him alone. Lastly, not only does it offer fast-paced thrills, I think Train to Busan is a fantastic gateway into Korean action cinema. Do not miss out on Train to Busan. It's action-packed, it's got drama, it's got heart, it has everything, and I think it's a perfect movie to watch this Halloween. So now we're gonna be in a genre of horror that I'm not too familiar with, and I've only watched 4 or 5 films in this category, and that's found footage. If you wanted to go with the OG, you could definitely start with the Blair Witch Project. I think the Blair Witch Project isn't scary. I think it's a really good gateway into found footage, at least from my limited experience. But without spoiling everything too much, I found that the cast of characters argued way too much. The film was a bit too cyclical, no pun intended, and I really wasn't that impressed with the ending. Regardless, I don't think it's scary. I think if anything, it's a bit claustrophobic, so you can definitely try other movies in this genre. Troll Hunter, I think, is a good example of found footage. I think it's very funny. It's not scary at all. I mean, yes, it's more hilarious than it is scary, but I found the film to be way too long for my liking, and even more so, I think it just meanders a bit too much. So far, my favorite found footage movie would probably have to be Gunjam Haunted Asylum. It's a fantastic South Korean found footage film that really has a pointed commentary about social media and YouTube streamers, but I would shy away from it if you scare easily because I think personally it's very terrifying. So my pick for you for found footage tonight would have to be 2007's Paranormal Activity. It's a film that focuses on a couple who are plagued by strange events in their home and are compelled to document them with an array of cameras. Now for my money, I think Paranormal Activity does the bare amount of good stuff without scaring the bejesus out of you. I think what Paranormal Activity does well is that it likes to pace out the dread throughout the film, because the film starts out with this couple who are very happy to move into their new home, but little by little they get a bit more anxious and a bit more terrified about these strange occurrences in their house, and that's why they begin to document, they begin to record stuff, and they begin to consult people. And little by little, they're trying to unravel what's going on around them. Furthermore, I think the cast does a really good job of just showing these emotions, and the film techniques are just fantastic. There's not so much shaky cam, everything's lit well, and I think it's a very nice and good movie to watch, especially if you live with a significant other or you have experienced shacking up with somebody. I think this is a good movie that's very relatable to all kinds of folks. Lastly, again, as I mentioned, it takes its sweet time and it doesn't meander around as much compared to, let's say, the Blair Witch Project. So if you wanted a good found footage horror film that isn't too scary and really does the due diligence of pacing out the horror, then definitely check out Paranormal Activity tonight. Now, some of you may have noticed that I've mentioned 2 Asian horror films already, so you're probably wondering, hey Naika, are you gonna recommend a Japanese horror film? And yeah, totally, because I love Japanese horror films and I think Japanese horror films are really, really unique. Japanese horror films have a long history and they just change decade to decade, and I think from the 50s onward to now, I think there's just so many good offerings in Japanese horror in general. Therefore, you have a lot of things to choose from. If you like giant monsters, then you can definitely go with the original Godzilla from the 1950s. If you're looking for something that's based on folklore mythology, you can definitely watch Kaidan, but I think Kaidan's very cinematic but also very scary, so that might not be your cup of tea. If you're looking for something that's a bit themed to the 70s, definitely check out House. It's a bit kooky, but I think it's really fun. If you're looking for something that's really, really stuck in the 80s, I would totally recommend Evil Dead Trap, but it is a little rough around the edges. One day I'll probably talk about that. If you scare easily and if you're a little squeamish on gore, maybe I would avoid Evil Dead Trap. However, if you're into mundane horror, definitely check out Pulse. I think Pulse is a fantastic movie that is also a good commentary about the internet, especially in the 2000s, but like the other films I mentioned, it's kind of scary too. So my pick for your Japanese horror tonight is actually going to be Ring. Wait, no, not that Ring, this Ring. Yes, the original, the OG Ring. In Ring, a journalist is investigating a series of deaths that all have one common link. Every victim died 7 days after viewing a cursed videotape. Now, I missed out on Ring Mania back in the 2000s, and I decided, you know what, it's 2022, I really need to catch up and sit down with this film. But instead of going the easy route and watching Gore Verbinski's remake of The Ring, I decided to basically search out the Arrow Video Blu-ray, and I came away amazed with the film. Because number one, The Ring is a very, very unique film because it plays out more like a mystery film than it does a straight up horror film. I chose The Ring because it's really the one film that swept the world back in the late 90s and early 2000s and really ushered in this trope of American horror remakes. And I think it's a film that really isn't that scary because a lot of the focus is about unraveling this urban legend about a cursed videotape that's going to kill you. The plotting and the pacing is fantastic, and so much of the film is really about unraveling the origins of this curse. The film also features fantastic performances by Nami Ayukawa and Hiroyuki Sanada, and I find that the film is just fantastic on so many levels, and it's also a great window into modern Japan. So if you're looking for a Japanese horror film that isn't that scary but plays out more like a mystery, do not miss out on Ring. And finally, I'm going to end the night with my last subgenre of horror, and that's my favorite subgenre of horror along with my wife's, and that is sci-fi horror. There are so many good examples to choose from when we talk about sci-fi horror. That includes classics like The Blob, modern 90s horror films like Event Horizon, which I think is fantastic, but it will scare the bejesus out of anybody, 80s movies like Night of the Creeps, and my favorite horror film of all time, The Thing from 1982, which I love to death, but yes, it is freaking terrifying. But my pick tonight will be 1988's They Live. It's a movie about a homeless drifter who's flung into the throes of an intergalactic conspiracy when a special pair of sunglasses forces him to confront the truth, that the ruling class are aliens controlling humanity through capitalism and subliminal messaging. I think They Live is the perfect horror film if you're someone that is left-leaning or progressive, or if you're a big fan of BreadTube, this is the perfect horror film to watch. The film does not rely on any scares whatsoever, but is really a calling card and a middle finger to Ronald Reagan back in the day. One of my favorite things about They Live is that it really hones in with action movie tropes, but does it in a way that there's still horror in this film, there's still mystery in this film. And if you're somebody that's looking for a film that kind of pushes back against these ideas of fascism, state-sanctioned violence, and the overreach of capitalism, I think They Live is a fantastic film. It's one of my favorite horror films of all time, and it's one of my favorite John Carpenter films ever. And I think if you're looking for something that's going to disgust you, amaze you, but also make you think, do not miss out on They Live, because so much of the film is more relevant to us now than it ever was in 1988. So yeah, that's my pick for your sci-fi horror tonight. Well guys, thanks a lot for sticking around and hearing me ramble on about horror movies. I've been meaning to do this Halloween special for the longest time, so I hope you guys give these films a chance, especially if you're somebody that scares really easily. I think every film I chose is one that I think you can just sit down and mellow out to. If you're having a Halloween bash this month, and if everybody's vaccinated, and if you guys just want to veg out and just eat candy and drink and just shoot the shit, I think these 10 films are fantastic. You're gonna come away amazed, you're gonna enjoy yourself, and you're also not gonna piss off any hardcore horror fans that you may have in your entourage. But even if they are pissed, who cares? You know, it's your party, right? So anyways guys, thanks so much for sticking around and watching this video. I hope you guys have a fantastic Halloween. Stay safe, and I will see you all in the next video.